Welcome to the CyberSangha podcast. CyberSangha is a program of free live broadcasts, launched in 2009 by renowned teacher and author Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Join us as we draw on ancient Tibetan wisdom to discover how to connect with our best self and live to our highest potential. The following conversation, Beyond the Yoga Mat, How Mind-Body Practice Can Transform Your Life, happened on February 6th, 2024 as a Science and Spirituality dialogue with Lorenzo Cohen, Alison Jefferies, and host Alejandro Chaoul. This was part of a year-long series from 2024. This content is for informational purposes only. Listeners should consult medical professionals for any physical or mental health concerns. Please use headphones and do not meditate while driving or operating machinery.
Welcome everyone to CyberSangha. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alejandro Chaoul. I'm the host for this programs on the dialogues on spirituality and science. I'm a longtime student of Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, who started CyberSangha with the idea, before even COVID, with the idea that we need to interconnect all over the world and do programs for free, that we can reach different audiences. And so every full moon, we do a 24-hour cycle where we start here in the US, we pass it to Finland, we go to Colombia, we go all around the world. So you're welcome to join every full moon for that. Rinpoche does teachings and dialogues also in Tibetan, and so for Tibetan audiences as well. So today we have two good friends of mine, Lorenzo Cohen, Dr. Lorenzo Cohen and Alison Jefferies. And I'll introduce them in a moment because we're going to be talking about this really interesting topic, what we're calling Beyond the Yoga Mat. So how mind-body practices can transform your life. And as we get into the mind-body practices, we'll get into something that they're very interested in, lifestyle, and what they are calling the mix of six in their book, Anti-Cancer Living. So we'll get to that. So Dr. Lorenzo Cohen is the Richard Haynes Distinguished Professor in Clinical Cancer Prevention and is Director of Integrative Medicine at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. And he also is the co-founder and past president of SIO, the Society of Integrative Oncology, and also former vice chair of the Academic Consortium for Integrative Medicine and Health. He has been doing research for 3 decades on different aspects of integrative medicine, particularly mind-body practices that we'll talk today, and has published more than 200 scientific publications. And so it's, and we've known each other, I just realized, for exactly 24 years. So it was a year of the dragon. So welcome. And Alison, his wife, I also know for the same amount of time. She's a nationally board certified wellness coach, author, and educator. She has a degree both in art history and education, along with master's degree in educational psychology, working extensively as an educator and bringing these ideas of integrative medicine, of lifestyle, into the house. And I think that's what we'll talk today. She has done also the wellness coaching education at Andrew Weil Center of Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona. And she works with individuals as a wellness coach. So Alison, Lorenzo, welcome. And as I mentioned,
for having us.
Thank you. And as I mentioned before, Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche sends his best regards. He's actually cleaning his house. It's Losar time, so Losar New Year. It's a very special time as we start from now until Friday, cleaning, cleansing, and then on Saturday bringing up the new energy. And so very special time. It's also the year of the dragon. and both Lorenzo and I are dragon, and we met in a year of the dragon. So it's a lot of dragon energy today. So I wanted to start actually with whoever wants to start from you about tell me a little bit about before we get into the cancer part. Let's get into lifestyle and why this mix of six, because my understanding is yes, you wrote it as an anti-cancer living, but it's beyond cancer, this mix of six.
The journey started for us, I guess, when we moved to Houston and Lorenzo started to work at MD Anderson Cancer Center. And he would come home. I was working in the classroom, and he would come home from work talking about his research, fellow colleagues' research, what was going on around the world in lifestyle and its relationship to cancer, but lifestyle and what the research was showing. And I found it fascinating, and we would talk about it. And then we started to have children. And I thought, here we have these children. Let's fill their toolbox with important things that they can carry with them through their life around health. And so we started to put a lot of energy into their upbringing around, lifestyle and health. And then we made the realization that we actually were not living it ourselves. And so then we realized that we needed to pivot and to start making changes. And we started doing it with our friends. And started, when we would gather, we would make an effort to have delicious, healthy things on the table. And so we started to make this change. And then we realized we kind of had a unique perspective. Lorenzo really understood the science, was part of that science, and around cancer and lifestyle. And we had been trying to make these changes, some successfully and some not, just inching our way forward. And realized we had a great perspective to share. And so we started giving talks in our community and around the country. And then we decided to write a book together.
And what is quite remarkable at that early stage is the lack of awareness that cancer was primarily a preventable disease. So most people are aware that diabetes, heart disease are likely primarily lifestyle related, but cancer, most people thought, it's in my genes, it's in my family, and there was nothing that I can do. Even extremely well-educated people had that belief. So from this unique platform, it just made sense to be able to educate the community.
So we, wrote this book. It took a couple of years, as you know. Books are labor intensive, and to get it right. And the day that we submitted our final draft, Lorenzo was diagnosed with an advanced cancer. And so we went from scientist and educator to cancer patient and cancer caregiver. And so added to that story.
I remember well. I remember well, and I think it had a great impact both in your lives and how you bring this to your sharing this knowledge and from this particularly perspective, which reminds me, of David Schreiber, right? And maybe you can tell the audience a little bit. So I remember when David Schreiber, who wrote the Anti-Cancer Way of Life, he came to Houston. We met. We actually went to a great Japanese restaurant, very healthy food, and I remember the conversations. And Lorenzo, do you want to say a little bit about that meeting and how this and about David and about how that inspired also the way that you were already going and how this inspired you to come to this book?
Yeah, actually, an important preface to that is I only heard and learned about David Schreiber, who's unfortunately died in 2011. introduced by Dr. Mendelsohn. So David's psychiatrist, was working at the University of Pittsburgh and doing fMRI kind of research in the area of mental health, and had no interest in cancer, but then serendipitously was able to diagnose himself because he got in the MRI one day because a patient didn't show up and they found a brain tumor. And so he underwent conventional treatment, continued his very stressful academic life, and then had a recurrence very soon after the initial surgery and chemotherapy. And so he then, asked the healthcare providers, well, what more can I do? And they're like, nothing. And he wasn't convinced that that was the case. And so he went to the literature and essentially started to develop his own evidence base to be able to guide himself through this very difficult brain tumor recurrence, and put together this book called Anti-Cancer: A New Way of Life, which essentially was the culmination of all the evidence that he'd found in four primary areas of lifestyle: diet, exercise, stress, and the environment. And so during that initial visit, over those couple of days, we kind of hatched the idea of rallying some local philanthropists to be able to raise some money to do a comprehensive lifestyle change clinical trial, which actually now we're just analyzing the 5-year survival time point. And so that was, it was in some sense kind of a pivot point, partly because we had the input and support from the president of MD Anderson, Dr. John Mendelsohn, who really helped us to launch the integrative medicine program originally, and allowed it to move forward and thrive. And today on MD Anderson's website, just one click in from the home page, there's a very strong statement that says lifestyle factors are very important in influencing your response to treatment and your overall survival. And at MD Anderson, we have X, Y, and Z. So yeah, it goes back to 2009 when we kind of shifted our integrative medicine program from the more conventional complementary treatments to really incorporating lifestyle as a whole, as we can get into. We call it yoga with a capital Y.
Right. Yeah. And I want to get into that because, so for the audience, so Lorenzo and I met in 2000. I was coming back from Nepal from learning Tibetan yoga. And I was actually in starting at wanting to get into health. My dad had been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and I started actually sharing some of the Tibetan practices at what then was called Place of Wellness. And then I went to Lorenzo, and there was an article in the Yoga Journal on Tibetan yoga, and he didn't know about Tibetan yoga, but I introduced that to him, and he said, well, I have a whole lineage of yoga, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about that and your impact in how, from your early days in Italy and from Vanda, and how that impacted what you call, I hear you call kind of the whole yoga, which might be the mix of 6. But if you want to say something of that to this audience.
So my grandmother, Vanda Scaravelli, was a yogini, and yoga came to her somewhat later in her life, in her late 40s, early 50s. And I spent every summer in Italy and spent a lot of time with her growing up. And she was vegetarian and really lived the yogic life in all aspects of her being, from her habits to her relationships to her life philosophy. She was very close friends with Krishnamurti, and so she had that in some sense that Eastern spiritual practice, even though She was, living, let's say, in a relatively conventional Western culture in Florence. And so, this is what I was exposed to and knew as a healthy way of living within our world. And in starting at MD Anderson, my background in research is as a health psychologist and really focused on the negative effects of stress, learning how stress gets into our body and makes diseases worse, not only vulnerability, but also progression of disease, in particular cancer. And, how can we counter this? And of course, there's actually stress that we can counter that we can get into more details. But the whole lifestyle approach seemed to make sense. So we started research early on looking at cognitive behavioral therapy, trying to treat depression and anxiety, and then very quickly realized, well, yoga, not defining it from an Indian tradition or a Chinese tradition or a Tibetan tradition, but, Pan-Asian yoga, as we've used the term in our publications together, could be very useful in a life-threatening illness situation.
Yeah. I remember early on, I'm trying to remember the year, but you, Rinpoche, and I sitting I think it was in the first International Conference of Integrative Medicine, sorry, of Tibetan Medicine. It was in DC. And Rinpoche asked you this question. And he said, sorry, you asked Rinpoche this question and said, if you were, now that we're going to do research together, what would be the most significant thing that you want things, a patient to change? And you probably remember his answer. It was open-heartedness, right? Open-heartedness. And of course, what that means is a deep connection to oneself and to others. So I remember your response at that time was, well, that sounds great. I don't know how we can measure that. But I think we come a long way. We're not really totally there, but where are we with how we can get to that and how we can get to particularly the importance, as you mentioned, stress, but also of mind-body practices. I do remember David Seven Schreiber, that as he was going around, it was easy to eat better. It was easy to move. It was harder to include mind-body practices in his life. Even when he wrote Not the Last Goodbye, he mentioned how that was so what he felt detrimental to his health of not doing that enough. If you can talk a little bit, or both of you, about that, because I think that's also what you find, Ali, and correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of bringing it to the family. I mean, you were the cooks, so at that time they didn't cook the kids, and so they ate what you gave them. You probably put them in all these sports, so they did, but get them to meditate. So if you can say a little bit about that.
Talking about that open-heartedness, the place that we all really need to start is with that compassion and gentleness for ourselves and curiosity as we look around. And certainly in mind-body practices, that's part of the foundation of how you inquire, how you move forward in areas that you're interested. When Lorenzo was diagnosed, we doubled down on the mix of 6, which starts with and goes in a special order that we can talk about, with love and support, your foundation, then moving to stress, then moving to sleep, then moving to exercise, diet, and exposure to environmental toxins. Sorry. And it's very important that you set yourself up for taking on new changes that you want to make. And stress, as I was saying, when Lorenzo was diagnosed, he doubled down. We both doubled down on the mix of 6. Lorenzo's gonna step out, grab our dog. Please excuse that. He realized that his weak link was stress management. And for so many of us who maybe were not raised in some of these Eastern traditions, it's one that needs complete dedication. It's not one that you can do with somebody else, for instance, in a dialogue. Like exercise, you could be walking and talking to your friend or making notes and doing all this. You really need to carve out that time for yourself.
You can eat lunch in a meeting,
right?
But you can't meditate in a meeting and while you're going on a walk.
It can be very social and very reinforcing. So don't get me wrong there, but it's one that we need to be present for. And we need to carve out that time to be present and build that awareness like we build a practice. So it takes time. And just to share a story before Lorenzo talks about the science of it, we started meditating with our family. So I decided that we were going to teach the kids how to meditate. So every day before school, we sat down on our pillows or just on the ground, and the kids started participating by choosing guided meditations that they liked. And we started with as little as 1 minute and eventually got ourselves up to 11 or 12 minutes. And it was transformative. I could really see that important things were happening both in our family space as well as with them individually. To see their faces completely absorbed in the meditation and present was remarkable. And it's a tool that they've taken with them as they've grown up.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. I do want to add something about this part that I think in meditation we can do both kind of a group and individual. And I want to actually mention a ritual that Eric and I, my wife and I, her, have. And we started actually during COVID. And what we do is that we sit together and we do a short meditation, but we integrate it. So after we finish and we kind of share the benefits, for, may be useful for everyone, then we actually drink mate, which is an Argentine, and then we talk a little bit about the day. What are you doing? And then, okay, we go each way. And I find, I find that relationship is also important. And actually, Lorenzo and I did a research with Tibetan yoga and couples, right? We call it, you always have acronyms. So TYC, the Tibetan yoga for couples. And it was interesting that besides the scientific part, which was important, of course, and we did find benefits in anxiety and in depressive symptoms and so forth. But what was interesting was that as they practiced together, they would reach out to each other, they enhanced their relationship. And I don't know, Lorenzo, if you want to talk a little more about that.
Well, I was just going to add to this that, what is challenging in this whole area, and it is the case to this day, that this whole area of managing stress, if we were to, that is not the origins of these practices. The monks and the practitioners of ancient times didn't develop these strategies to manage, the stress of life. It has a deeper purpose that we can get into. But in the West, this is what we've turned to some of these mind-body practices, is to decrease sympathetic nervous system activation, to help people sleep better, to feel calmer about your life. Even though we know the harms of chronic stress, this is just not prioritized as a society. And, in cancer prevention, there is a lot of acceptance now of diet and exercise, the importance of diet and exercise. A little bit about sleep is creeping in to the dialogue. And people just aren't acknowledging the importance of stress, even though the data is absolutely overwhelming, that stress will have a negative impact on all biological systems in the body, and clear evidence showing that it will literally get into the tumor microenvironment, which is where the cells are growing in the body, and make it more hospitable to cancer growth. And we understand the mechanisms, how that is happening through many pathways, but in particular norepinephrine, the fight or flight stress hormone, cortisol. Cancer cells literally have beta receptors on them, and the norepinephrine will stimulate inappropriate cell growth. There's what are called the cancer hallmarks, which are biological processes that need to be activated to allow that initial mutated cell, and cancer always starts from one cell that has gone awry, multiple processes that need to be activated to allow that cell to continue to grow in the body. And there's now up to 12 different biological pathways, that cancer hallmarks, and chronic stress activates all the cancer hallmarks, not just one or two of them, but literally all of them. It suppresses our immune system so the cancer can hide. It increases angiogenesis, so the cancer cells have an increased vascularization so that they can get more blood. It changes our metabolism, et cetera, et cetera. So, I always kind of wonder why, even though the evidence is as strong for stress. And I think part of it is people throw their hands up and say, well, life is stressful. You're never going to avoid stress. And actually, in presenting some of our data to our own colleagues at MD Anderson, showing that stage 4 kidney cancer patients die sooner if they have depression at the time of diagnosis. And one of the faculty said, well, of course they're stressed because they have cancer. And yes, of course they're stressed. They have cancer. But that doesn't mean that stress shouldn't be managed. And there's so many different tools for managing stress in one's life. And, most importantly is it's not just about managing stress. It's about being, as you were saying earlier, and as Rinpoche said, it's about being more connected to oneself, connected to others, connected to the larger community. And that's where you really get true transformation.
And we do have some choices around stress. We're all bombarded with stress, and each of us has our own different stress, but how we respond to it is what sets us apart. And so we have choices of finding things that can really connect with us, and each of us having the same thing is not going to work. We know ourselves really well, and so it's important to start there, to think about yourself and what is going to work for you. What are the options out there that you could explore? Are you interested in yoga, tai chi, meditation, cognitive behavioral therapy? What are some of the things that you think could help you? What could you do by yourself? What could you do with a partner, your family, your friends? Because we're all facing this and we're all challenged with it.
Yeah. And also, I mean, you mentioned it tangentially, but of course, I know it's a big part for you, and the research shows it is the social support, right? The aspect of, like, even in the case that you were talking, Lorenzo, of this patient and the doctor mentioning about the stress, when they have social support, when we have social support, it's a huge difference, both in terms of stress and in terms of health and in terms of survivorship.
Yeah, I mean, support, that's the foundation for anti-cancer living. We start with that area of love and support. And I'll talk, more about the direct effects, and Alison can follow up and talk about the indirect effects. But there is evidence actually to show that social support is directly linked with survival, and some of these cancer hallmarks. People who have more support have a higher immune function. They have decrease in inflammation. There's some beautiful research by my close colleague Susan Lukendorf, the University of Iowa, showing that ovarian cancer patients who had more social support had decreased norepinephrine in the tumor microenvironment at the time of surgery. So, it's not just that you feel loved, it's that all your biological systems are functioning better and optimally when you are more connected to people.
And support comes in many different ways. When you're facing a cancer diagnosis, for instance, you need support in a variety of different places: informational, practical, emotional. You need somebody who's your cheerleader, as well as someone who you can share your deepest and darkest thoughts about your situation. You need somebody to pick up the kids or to take your parents somewhere. You need a physician or a professional in an area that you need knowledge in. And for both the person with a cancer diagnosis, or for someone who's exploring something new, or for the caregiver, we all need our own team of people. And it's a team. It can't be one person to do all of those different things for you. So spending time first before you make a change, thinking about what am I going to need to accomplish this change? If I want to, explore yoga or Tai Chi or something new, looking at my diet or exercise, what do I really need to have in place? Because we all really know what sabotage, how easily you can be sabotaged in your efforts. You decide tomorrow's the day I'm going to start exercising, and then you don't sleep well, you wake up late, you're feeling grumpy, and you say, not today. So it's really better to back up and to think, well, what do we need to be successful? And also to start from that place of gentleness and self-compassion, and guilt, shame, and blame. Put those behind you right now, because they're not productive for you to accomplish the things you want to accomplish. And you just start from where you are. It's the smallest of steps that makes all of those others follow.
Yeah. And actually, I remember when, at one point we were doing just research in one area and the other, and then decided to do all the areas. But then what we realized, a little bit what you're saying, Alison, is that, well, they are learning mind body, they're learning nutrition, they even have a Vitamix, right? They're learning exercise, but they're not able to go beyond the barriers. And so a health psychologist was crucial in helping them to understand, to actually start doing them. And Lorenzo, do you want to say a little bit about that study and why that's important? And then I want to come back actually to Alison, who's a wellness coach in health psychology. So I want to, bring a little more of this area that I think it's less known.
Well, so when we launched the integrative medicine program, I knew to be able to get people healthy, and coming from a background as a research psychologist, but embedded within the health psychology model, that it's fine to have a dietitian and an exercise coach on staff, and of course the integrative modalities of massage, music therapy, acupuncture, yoga, which we have at MD Anderson. I said to the then medical director, we really need to have a psychologist as part of the program. And he kind of frowned. He's like, really? Why? And it's like, well, because what we're asking people to do is really hard. And they don't just need the information, they need the support. They need somebody to help them understand the barriers, to overcome the barriers, to teach them how to work within their network that could, as Alison is saying, inadvertently sabotage you, and how to talk about this, etc. And he agreed to disagree, and he was the center medical director at the time, and then started with the diet and the exercise, and then 6 months later he came back to me and he said, Lorenzo, we need to have a psychologist. All the patients are struggling in implementing the prescription that we're giving them. Like, I tell them to eat better and to exercise more and to get a good night's sleep, but they're not doing it. And everyone's got, these barriers, and some of them are mental health issues, not even necessarily a full-blown diagnosis of depression, but there's a lot of stress and anxiety and worry. And so then we hired one, and now we have two, and we're about to ask for a third full-time health psychologist to be able to work with patients. To me, that is the glue that brings together the information that we provide people. So, sure, the dietitian can give advice on aspects of behavior change, but they're primarily, like in Alison's model of social support, giving the information. These are the types of food that you should eat. This is the kind of exercise you should be doing. Here's the yoga asanas and the sun salute that you should be doing on a daily basis. But those healthcare professionals don't really know the details on how to help somebody make the difficult changes. And that's what a health coach, a psychologist, a behavioral counselor is really needed.
The beautiful work around coaching is that it's so positive. So, when I'm working with somebody one-on-one, it's, those barriers are things that we discuss, and maybe out of that conversation, you realize that you've actually set the wrong goal, and that you don't want to be working on fitness, that you want to be working on diet, or you want to change your job, or, there's so many different things that come up through the discussion that you generate. And that's really the key, is it's time needs to be spent thinking about, what is it that I really care about in my life? What are my priorities? What are my core values? And then how does this fit into that core value? Are they related? And is this a priority for me to make this change right now? And supporting people and talking through those barriers and figuring out ways, the actual person figures out the way to get through it. So it's not about, for instance, me providing information. It's about the client providing information and then talking about it. And does that make sense?
And in our research, it's clear that the majority of the barriers were, and these are patients with advanced breast cancer, were in and around stress and the emotion issues. And, the average age of these women were in their mid-50s, early 60s. And so some of their unhealthy behaviors weren't recent. So these were, very difficult in behaviors to change that were part of an individual's life, emotion-based eating and negative relationships it's not as easy as eat this and move in this way and everything will be fine. Not only, would not dealing with some of the underlying issues make it harder to engage in healthy living, but it'll ultimately sabotage any goal to try and sustain the behavior change, because everyone's experienced eating healthfully and exercising for a month or two. What are you doing a year later? What are you doing even 6 months later? Most people have reverted back into an unhealthy living pattern.
Yeah. And Ali, you mentioned before this word choice, right? And I see that many times, we give them this prescription, do this, do that. But as a wellness coach, you are actually opening the possibilities for them to choose what's good for them Can you tell the audience a little more of how is that so they can also find in their own life how they can do these choices?
And it's a very important part of, for instance, in the coaching process, choice, because it's all your own choice, the client's choice. It's you may be presented with information about how to do something, but you really have to look at that and say, is this something that I can relate to? Does this feel like something that I want to pivot towards? And so it's really those small steps, and that shifting of awareness as you look at something, and then deciding, is this something that I want to do? And so in the coaching process, the choices are all yours. And it's not about have you made good choices or not. It's about possibilities and thinking about them, bringing awareness to them, shifting your thinking around things and deciding, do I want to move in this direction? And what would be my first step? And like we said with anti-cancer living, having that social support and that foundational help to take those first steps is really essential. And in the coaching role, I play that role as one of your team. In your own life, you have potentially a partner, children, friends, colleagues who all can step in to help you think about how you're going to approach something new and support you doing it.
And it has to be intrinsic, right? The behavior change will not be sustainable if it doesn't come from within. So I think, in hearing a lot about coaching from Alison, that her job is to try and help the person to find that intrinsic reason, and exploring meaning and purpose and life goals is one way to then bring it back in, instead of, oh, I just want to lose weight because society says I should weigh less. That's not going to be as powerful as that they want to be able to run around with their grandchildren, and to be able to get down on the floor and get back up again after playing Lego with them.
And what about deciding with each of these areas, like, I hate to go to the gym, right? I don't like to go to the gym, but I like to bike, right? And so for me, is like, okay, we need to get on the bike, and I mostly do kind of commuting bike, whether I do it when I used to go to MD Anderson, when I come here to the Mind Body Spirit Institute, and so I bike now. The days that I don't, that the days in Houston that don't allow me to bike, then I'm like crazy, like trying to find what to do. But is it okay to find what you like, or is there like, no, you have to do this? How do you balance that choice with prescriptions?
Well, that's a good question. I think that you have to start with things that you enjoy doing. And also, but even backing up, let's suppose you're not physically active right now, but you'd like to be. Okay, brainstorm maybe with a colleague or a friend. What are some things that I could do? And then, do I like any of those things? Or am I willing to try any of those things? Because it really doesn't matter what we do. I mean, there's different types of exercise. We have weight bearing, weight training, we have cardiovascular health, and then we have, flexibility and balance. And it's really about movement. If we're looking at something, we want to just get moving. So you bike to work. You park the car at the end of the parking lot and you walk that distance. You take the dog and you go an extra 3 blocks. You stand when you have a meeting. You look for different ways so that it's a bigger package. And if you can't right now, and you don't want to go to the gym, but if you stand while, watching television for the commercials, or, while you're having a meeting, you've done small little things and those add up. So it's really about what you connect with and being open to try something new.
The challenge, though, is that there is a prescription.
Yes.
To the degree, like Alison said, there are 3 areas of movement. One of them is resistance training, one of them is exercising your heart, and the other is stretching your muscles. And those 3 are different. And if you're only doing one of them, it's not as good for your body. So, but it's super easy to modify all of those to meet an individual's needs. So you don't want to go to the gym and pump iron. Some people do, and that's fine. And that's an easy way to build muscle, but you can also just do some push-ups. You can, even do wall push-ups if you can't do it from the ground. You can just squat against the wall. Squats against the wall provide a ton of resistance. We do a lot of chair exercises with patients, for sitting to standing. Do that for 5 minutes. You'll see how much your thighs burn. So it can be very simple things that we can just incorporate into our life and still follow the prescription.
And there is, 150 minutes a week and 2 times a week of weight training. So that there's, prescribed amounts that you'd like to work towards over the course of developing a movement-based plan.
So let's get to mind-body practices. And, there's so many. Much of our audience are familiar with much of Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche's teachings and other Tibetan teachings and some Indian teachings, yoga and Tai Chi. How do you recommend when you get into the mind-body practices area? Tell us where to start.
Well, we all know what the best mind-body practice is. I'm not going to tell you. It's the one that you're going to do every day, right? I mean, so I come at this, as you heard at the beginning, of course, from the Indian-based tradition. But and when I first learned about Tibetan yoga, one of the early things that struck a negative chord in me, if we were to use that term, is you're holding your breath. What do you mean you're holding your breath while you're doing the pose? That's not what you're supposed to do. And so, when you get to the ground level, let's call it, some of these practices look different. And yoga asanas can be very static, and Tai Chi Qigong is constantly moving and fluid. But if you go up to the 35,000-foot view, which I'm sure everyone on the call today knows, they are very similar. They are working on the concept of joining the mind with the body. Of course, the brain is part of the body, but oftentimes the mind is somewhere else. And to become more connected within, and that means that you're more connected to the outside, and Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche's concept of open-heartedness. So all of these practices ultimately have that larger goal, increase consciousness and being connected to oneself and others. And so the best one is going to be the one that you do every day, because ultimately the similarities are there, and that should be somewhat gratifying to us, is that they are so similar. When you strip away some of the surface practices, there is always a focus on an aspect of the mind. I hesitate to use the word control the mind, but it's being able to harness the monkey mind, as it's called. There's always a focus on body, and there's always a focus on breath. And that's common across all mind-body practices.
Also, importantly, we change as time goes on, and sometimes we kind of get flat with a practice, and that's a moment to join a group meditation out in your community, to explore a different type of meditation. I'm giving that as an example, to see whether or not you're still connecting to what you're doing, and to build on it, to develop it, or to realize I need to shift a little bit, and maybe I'm going to take on this new mind-body practice.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit now, honing on the family, and you mentioned a little bit how you did it with the kids, kind of, expanding that. How do you see it with that, and with expanding to the community? I mean, we're in Houston. Some people meditate, many don't. So when we talk about these things, sometimes it feels like, what are you talking about, right? So how are you able to bring these ideas and trickle into people that are totally out of it? Like, for example, for you, Ali, that they come as a coach, and many times they're not even thinking of mind-body practices, right? They're thinking mostly nutrition, exercise, and sometimes, as Lorenzo said, sleep might be the third, right? How do you bring, or do you bring, the mind-body practices?
Inevitably, both with anti-cancer living and living well with Alison, which is my coaching practice, people mention stress. And so from that conversation, that's the starting point. Well, how do you define stress? What are you talking about? Has anything worked to help you kind of get rid of that stress? And things, in first steps or things to think about, I mean, being in nature, right? So conversations evolve like that. To, what am I willing to do? What am I interested in doing? When do I need to have a more in-depth practice? So we had done the meditation in the family as the kids were growing up. But after Lorenzo's diagnosis of cancer and going through the treatment and surgery, etc., I realized that I wasn't coping well, and I knew that I needed to do something different. And so I kind of went through the list of things, mind-body practices that I felt like I could connect with at that moment, and did ask Lorenzo if he would do the, mindfulness-based stress reduction course together. And so we did the 8-week course, which really allowed me to develop my own meditation practice, but I had a partner to do it with so that we could talk about it and that we could do it in the future together. So it's really meeting people where they are in that moment, really looking at yourself and saying, what can I take on right now? Can I just walk in the sunshine and look at the clouds? Or am I ready for an 8-week course?
Yeah. So again, a lot of times we frame mind-body practices under the rubric of stress. What about meaning and purpose?
So meaning and purpose is critical, and within our mix of 6, it blends between the first 2 pillars of love and support and stress. There's evidence to suggest that people who have more meaning and purpose actually have the modification of the way our genes behave. And there's something called eudaimonic well-being, the well-being that you derive from having a deep meaning and purpose in life. And that could be through your work, through your family, through volunteering. And people who score higher on eudaimonic well-being have decreases in gene inflammatory signaling profiles and better gene regulation as it relates to immune function, etc. So this concept of being in a state of eudaimonic well-being is salubrious for multiple biological processes. I think, as Alison was mentioning, that is sort of an entry point in health coaching, to figure out what's meaningful and then to align your life in and around meaning and purpose. The leadership training course that the 2 of us did together, that was a key component in becoming a good leader is recognizing what are your core values and then trying to live your life aligned with those. And that's when actually we start getting into this concept of open-heartedness, because as humans, it's probably not surprising that a lot of our core values are similar. Now, when we move out of that and we start living outside our core values, that's when we see society as a whole has kind of gone wrong. And so the title of the session today is also this concept of taking yoga off the mat. So yes, we should do our practice and we sit or we move, and we do that for, ideally 10, if not, more minutes per day. But it's what you're doing when you're not in your mind-body practices that is equally important. And that gets to this issue of living a meaningful and purposeful life.
We had Barbara Fredrickson in our program before, and as you're talking about eudaimonic health, and that's part of her research. And one of the things she was talking about is this kind of micro moments, right? That if you have these micro moments of meaning or of happiness, these are really important. They do kind of add up. So it's not like just like you're happy or not happy, or you think you're a person that is all about meaning and purpose or not. But even having these micro moments that can be really important in this building up and to your overall health. Is that makes sense in your, yeah.
Well, the effects of a mind-body practice allow you to, change the way in which you express yourself, right? They help you manage your emotions and help you manage some of the things that you're experiencing. These are the biological effects of it. And, when you have and you can go through an experience and be calm and be able to step back and take a breath and find your center, that allows you to have those micro moments of, I handled that difficult situation well. I was good in interacting with my teenager, right? I stopped and made a different choice. So it's all interconnected.
Great. So as we slowly come, wrapping up, I wanted first of all to make sure that you say, can you tell the audience these are the 6 points? So clearly, so they really have it, and maybe even almost like a little double click explaining a little bit of all 6.
So for the mix of 6 or, things, okay. Yeah. So love and support, right? Your team. Where do you feel like you need bolstering up, or who do you need to get in place so that you can handle whatever's going on in your life, whether it's a cancer diagnosis, wanting to get healthy, wherever you are. So assembling your team for stress. What are you willing to look at? What are you willing to explore? How can you deepen a practice that you potentially have? Also, what curiosity can I bring to this to freshen it? Where can I take it more, further? Sleep.
So we haven't talked much about sleep, but suffice it to say that people who don't sleep enough hours, which would be 6.5 hours or less, and I know there's people saying, I don't need 6 hours, I'm fine with 5. Maybe, there is a normal curve and you may be an outlier, but most people are not outliers. And those who sleep less than 6.5 hours, you pick a disease, they have a higher chance of getting it. You pick a disease, if they have it, they have a higher chance of dying from it. So the sweet spot is between 7 and 9 hours of sleep, and very important to seek out a sleep expert if if that is an area of struggle.
And that sabotages all of your best intentions in other areas, lack of sleep. So after sleep is exercise. So looking at the smallest thing that you can do to change where you are today from where you want to go, but also remembering, put support in place before you take that first step. Talk about it with somebody. I'm really thinking of extending or taking a walk 3 times a week, whatever it is, small steps. Diet, we haven't really talked a lot about diet. I think that it's really, when we speak about it together, it's really about what you can bring in versus taking out. So what new things can you bring in that are vegetable, that are healthy grains, lean and clean protein? The anti-cancer plate has half vegetables, and then you've got a small amount of protein, small amount of all the other things that would be nuts and seeds, etc.
Essentially, it's a plant-centered diet. So people don't have to be vegetarian. No. They certainly don't have to be vegan, but the majority of your plate has to be whole foods from the plant world.
One of the ways we did it in our house when we were starting out was that I would say, we're going to have half of the plate as vegetables. Okay, so that's where I'm starting to plan the meal. And I would make things that took longer one day and things that were shorter another, and we would have leftovers, and it allowed us to have different vegetables that were quick and easy. And then finally, exposure to environmental toxins, we also haven't spoken about, which is a really tough area because there are over 85,000 chemicals that are in use, and 8 or 9% have actually been assessed for their toxicity. So it's really top of the head to the tip of the toes, and looking at what you're putting on and in your body, and what's within your budget. And as you use one product and finish it, on every supermarket shelf are healthier products that you can choose to bring into your home. And so just thinking about that also in relation to, for instance, if you have kids in the house, teenage girls, are putting over 160 chemicals on their body per day. So it's really, there's a huge load. And so it's really about minimizing that load as much as you can. And especially if you're dealing with a disease like cancer. So you want your treatment to be working in the best possible way. You want your body to be performing in the best possible way. So lessening the burden of chemicals that you're putting on it and in it is a place to start.
Something that we haven't talked about in depth, but Alison alluded to in and around sleep and sabotaging. The positive side of this is that there is synergy that happens with these 6 lifestyle areas. And in our book, Anti-Cancer Living, in each section, we talk about how that individual behavior can work synergistically with the others. So there is actually a link between managing stress and having a better response to healthy food. There is a direct link between sleep loss and changing how you metabolize food. Social support infuses, in all of the areas. So the more successful you are in one area, the more successful you're going to be in another area. And harnessing the power of positive synergy is really the goal.
Yeah, and Rinpoche has been actually lately really emphasizing the area of sleep, and wearing an aura ring and measuring, so that's something that he's been. The other part that we didn't touch on, that we have spoken in other dialogues, and he's very interested, is the whole area of intermittent fasting. So not the eat, but the not eat. I don't know if you want to say a word on that.
Well, we could have a whole talk on any.
Right. Oh, that I know.
Click on any of the mix of 6, and certainly in the area of diet, this concept of intermittent fasting or restricted eating, it's very important. And of course, dating back millennia, all cultures around the world have fasting as part of some type of ritual and or religious-based practices. And there, a lot of these culinary practices within religions evolved from the doctors within that society. And it was for health-based reasons. So we're realizing that today, certainly with data, that at a minimum restricted eating time and intermittent fasting has tremendous health benefits.
I find the most difficult one, of course, being environmental, and we live in Houston. So, I get almost daily this thing on my phone that says, kind of almost don't go out because the air is at a really low healthy percentage, and so sometimes that I find kind of the hardest one to change, actually.
It's the elephant in the room. It's a huge issue, and we have, limited control. And so that's why it's so important that you can control your environment to the best of your ability, and make choices as you can to really minimize the exposure you're getting in your own home and with products that you use. But going out into the world, it's scary.
So as we conclude, anything else that you want to tell the audience as we wrap it up?
That there's so much opportunity, right? Every day is a new day to lead that life that has meaning and purpose. And we have more control than we think. In this area of environment, it will take all of society to create change. There are very few people who have more control than the majority of our society. But I think as a society, we can create change at the individual level and then ultimately at the societal level. And we know that what is healthy for us as an individual is actually healthy for the planet. I'm somewhat optimistic that we will get to a healthier place as a world.
Great. Alison, anything else to add?
It's very positive and reinforcing when you start to make that small shift and look at something new with fresh eyes. And so really just, being where you are right in this given moment, thinking about, things that you would like to shift your energy towards, and then thinking about how can I prepare myself so that I can be really successful at something very small, really small, not I'm going to work out 5 days a week, right? It's what can I do that's going to be super small and that I can be successful? And then once I have consolidated that and made that part of my daily life, then I take on the next step. And it's very positive and it feels great.
Excellent. So small, yes, I've done that. Another one, yes.
Yeah, that's right. Realistic things.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being in our CyberSangha. Lorenzo, Alison, it's been great. It's always great to see you. And I want to tell the audience too, it is coming the new year, and in the weekend we'll have programs for Losar New Year, but also we start the new full moon, and that's February 23rd. And at 10 a.m. New York time, Rinpoche will start with a little talk and practice, and we'll kick off the whole 24 hours. So I invite you for that. Thank you, Milos, Poli, and everyone behind the scenes to make this happen. And until next time, again, Alison, Lorenzo, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the CyberSangha podcast. If you'd like to learn more about CyberSangha, visit us online at cybersangha.net.